The first rule of midnight driving? Don't check your rear view. You might not be the only one in the car. Tonight, dread Scribe writes again. The night stretched like an endless ribbon of asphalt, coiling beneath my tires with a whispering hum. Route 17 was the kind of road that felt carved out of a dream. Too empty, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums until even your heartbeat sounds accusatory. I had been driving for 3 hours straight, alone except for the brittle glow of the dashboard and the occasional flicker of my headlights catching the reflective eyes of something feral in the woods. The isolation didn't feel freeing, it felt surgical, as if the world had been cut away and left me suspended in black. That was when I started scanning the radio. Anything to break the monotony, to slice through the hush that clung like damp wool. Most stations were dead air, just static stretching like dry paper between frequencies. Then, somewhere near the lower end of the AM dial, I found it. A voice. At first it was fractured, swimming through static like a drowning man. Then words began to surface, slow, deliberate, as if they were crawling up from the depths of something ancient. I froze when it said my name. Not just a generic call, not like those cheesy trucker broadcasts. My full name. Each syllable dragged out, intimate and wrong, like a stranger whispering from inside a locked room. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale under the glow of the dashboard. My breath hitched in shallow waves. Rationality tried to wrestle control, clawing at excuses, maybe a prank station, maybe coincidence. But then the voice said something else, something no one should know. It recited the name of my childhood dog, the one that died when I was 8. The sound of that name, those 2 soft syllables, hit like a mallet against bone. I could almost smell summer grass, feel the ghost of fur brushing against my fingers. My chest constricted, and I felt an icy draft sweep through the car, though. Every window was sealed shut. A whisper of pine and wet earth curled into my lungs like smoke. Ahead, the dark wasn't uniform anymore. A glimmer, a faded sign with paint peeling like old skin, emerged in my headlights. Gas, next right. The voice pulsed louder, its edges serrated by static, urging me toward the exit like a tide pulling at an anchored ship. It described the station in detail. Broken red pumps, a single rusted bench, a flickering overhead light. And then, almost tenderly, it promised I'd see someone waiting for me. How could it know what I hadn't even seen yet? My pulse thundered. As I took the turn, tires crunching over gravel. The station bled out of the darkness like a wound, just as the voice had painted it, every detail stitched in place. I killed the engine and sat there, the night pressing closer, my breath fogging the glass. The radio crackled one last time before falling silent, and then came the first knock, soft, deliberate, from the trunk. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through me like a needle through silk, sharp, precise, impossible to ignore. A single knock followed by stillness so complete I could hear the blood moving behind my ears. My hands hovered above the steering wheel, trembling, as if gripping anything would anchor me to something sane. But sanity felt like a city miles behind me now, swallowed by this dirt lot where shadows grew teeth. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of cooling metal, a branch falling. The old lies we tell ourselves when fear becomes too big to fit inside the body. But then the second knock came, heavier this time, deliberate, pulsing like a heartbeat from the hollow of the trunk. My chest tightened, ribs like locked gates straining against panic. I reached for the keys, intending to restart the engine, to lunge back onto Route 17 and never look back. But the dashboard screen flickered before I could touch the ignition. A ripple of green light rolled across it like oil on water, and then words began to scrawl themselves, letter by agonizing letter. Don't drive away, not yet. My throat closed. I hadn't touched my phone, but I grabbed it anyway, fumbling for a signal. None. Just an empty gray bar and the battery icon bleeding down to red. The station light above me buzzed erratically, sputtering shadows across the ground like veins of darkness splitting open. Each time it dimmed, the world felt closer, heavier, as if something enormous was breathing just beyond the circle of light. The voice returned, not through the radio this time, but through the car's speakers, low, molten, sliding under my skin like smoke in a locked room. It spoke softly, the way someone might speak to a fevered child. "You left something unfinished," it said. "Open it. See what's yours." My fingers hovered over the door handle, slick with sweat. Every instinct screamed against moving, but a different current pulled at me, something cold and gravitational, like the pull of the tide against the bones of a shipwreck. I stepped out. The air hit like a blade, sharp with the scent of rust and rain-soaked earth. Gravel crunched underfoot as I moved. To the trunk, another knock, louder now, impatient. The metal skin of the car seemed to vibrate, humming with a pulse not my own. I slid the key into the lock, every nerve fraying like overdrawn wires. The lid lifted with a groan, hinges yawning open like the mouth of something starved. Inside was a mirror. Just that, a small, round mirror reflecting my own face. But the reflection wasn't still. It smiled before I did, a fraction of a second early, like it knew the choreography of my fear. And then the voice, warm, wet, and infinite, poured out of the glass itself. "Now drive, and don't look back. We're not done yet." The trunk slammed shut on its own, and in the silence that followed, the engine roared to life without my hand on the key. Midnight on an open highway feels like the edge of a map, a place not drawn for human eyes. The asphalt stretched under my tires like a black artery, pulsing faintly in the cold glow of my headlights. I'd been driving for hours with nothing but the low hum of the engine to remind me that life still existed. Out here, silence isn't empty. It's a predator, circling the edges of your thoughts, until even the tick of your own pulse sounds intrusive. When I first saw the flash ahead, I thought it was a trick of my exhaustion, a firefly caught in the beam. But as the distance closed, the shape sharpened into something real. A car pulled to the shoulder, hazards pulsing in the dark. Red, 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 each flare like a heartbeat straining to keep something alive. I eased my foot off the gas, torn between instinct and obligation. You don't leave someone stranded out here, not when the night feels like it's swallowing the road whole. The gravel crunched under my tires as I slowed to a stop behind the car. It was an older sedan, paint dulled by time, the kind of vehicle that carried decades of dust and stories. Its engine was running, a low, steady hum that gave the night a strange, mechanical breath. But the driver's seat was empty. So was the passenger side. Both doors shut, windows fogged faintly as if someone had been inside not long ago. Something in me whispered to leave, to put the car in reverse and vanish into the black. But I stepped out. The air hit like ice on bare skin, dense, damp, laced, with the metallic tang of ozone. Pines loomed on both sides of the highway, their branches like skeletal arms clawing at the void. The hazard lights splashed the scene in red strobes, painting my shadow long and twitching across the asphalt. Every flash felt like a warning flare, something bleeding out in silence. I circled to the rear window. That's when I saw it. 3 letters, etched into the condensation in bold, frantic strokes. Run. The word clung to the glass like a living thing, trembling faintly under the wash of light. My stomach dropped, gravity doubling in an instant. Who wrote it? Why leave the car running? The questions swarmed like hornets in my skull, stinging deeper with each passing second. And then, breathing. Soft at first, almost imagined, but growing. Slow, heavy, dragging air through unseen lungs. It wasn't coming from the car. It was coming from the tree line, a sound too deliberate to be wind, too patient to be anything harmless. The pines whispered like conspirators, their shadows stretching closer with every flicker of red. I turned toward the woods, heart ricocheting against my ribs. And that's when something moved, just enough to break the geometry of the dark. Something waiting. Something that had been there. It was a trick of the light, a shadow folding in on itself, rearranging like smoke. But the shape held, tall, unnervingly still, as if carved from the night itself. My instinct screamed louder than thought, every nerve firing. A single command: leave. The breath came again, deeper now, drawn through what sounded like an unholy throat. It carried weight, like the exhale of something built to outlive men. I couldn't move, my legs rooted in gravel, heart hammering in my chest like fists on a locked door. The hazard lights kept pulsing, painting the highway in staccato strokes of red, as though marking time for something that had already begun. Then the sound changed. Another rhythm joined the breathing, a soft, deliberate crunch. Footsteps, closing the space between us, grain by grain. I strained to see detail, a glimmer, an edge, anything to give it a name, but the figure seemed designed for darkness, as though the black had grown limbs and chosen to walk. I turned toward my car, every muscle screaming with static, but froze mid-pivot. The sedan, the one that wasn't mine, its driver's door hung open now. It hadn't been before, I knew it. The memory burned behind my eyelids like a negative image. And from inside the car, a sound crawled out, a low hum, too low to belong to the engine, too steady to be human. It pulsed like sonar, mapping the emptiness. My body moved before reason did, bolting back to my own car. Gravel sprayed behind me, lungs tearing against the cold. I yanked the door, slammed it shut, and locked it with a violence that rattled the glass. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared, a fragile promise of escape. Headlights flared to life, slicing the dark into trembling ribbons. And that's when I saw it. The figure wasn't in the woods anymore. It stood at the edge of the shoulder, no more than 20 feet away. Too tall, limbs too long, angles wrong in ways my brain refused to catalog. Its head tilted, a slow liquid motion, like something studying a specimen behind glass. My breath fogged the windshield, and for a moment I felt like prey trying to remember the concept of flight. I threw the car into gear. Tires screamed as I lunged forward, swallowing pavement like a starving animal. The hazard lights of the abandoned sedan faded behind me, blinking slower, weaker, like a dying pulse surrendering to night. But just as the road straightened and my pulse began to unclench, a new sound leaked from the back seat. Not a knock this time. A whisper, low and curling. Like smoke finding cracks, you saw it too. My stomach hollowed. My eyes darted to the mirror. Empty. Except for the faint outline of condensation blooming across the rear glass, where one word began to write itself in trembling strokes. Run. And the voice whispered again. Closer now. The highway stretched, like a wound across the dark, stitched only by the faint glimmer of distant tail lights. I drove on in silence, the kind that hums beneath your skin when the world feels emptied out, leaving just you and the sound of your own breath. Fatigue had begun to chew at my focus, turning the white lines into hypnotic whispers dragging me forward. It was a night built for shadows, the kind that gather in corners you don't dare look at too long. When it happened, it was almost ordinary. A flick of the eyes, a glance in the mirror, habit born from caution. But what I saw burned through me like an ember pressed to flesh. Someone was sitting in the back seat, pale, motionless, hands folded neatly in their lap, as though they had been waiting longer than time should allow. The face, God, the face, wore a smile carved too thin, sharp as shattered glass. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even malice. It was patience, distilled into something that should not fit inside human skin. My throat constricted, every instinct clawing at reason, screaming that this wasn't real. I spun around so fast the seatbelt bruised my collarbone. Empty. Just fabric and shadow, the headrest framed like a hollow stage where something had performed and vanished in the same breath. My pulse jackhammered, the taste of iron blooming in my mouth. I told myself it was exhaustion, a hallucination born from caffeine and miles of asphalt. But the lie fractured when my phone buzzed in the console, its glow slicing through the dark, like a blade of ice. The notification glared up at me in sterile letters. "Thank you for picking up Emily. Enjoy your ride." My vision blurred, a hot wave crashing against the edges of logic. Emily. The name pulsed like a heartbeat in my skull. I hadn't opened the rideshare app in hours. I hadn't accepted anything. My thumb trembled as I tapped the screen, dragging it into clarity. There it was. Active trip. Destination unknown, timer counting forward like a fuse. Beneath it, a photo, a woman with porcelain skin and eyes that looked like they'd forgotten light. The same smile that had just haunted my mirror. Every nerve in me howled to pull over, to throw the car into reverse and fling myself into the night if it meant severing whatever cord had just wrapped around my reality. But I couldn't stop looking at that photo, at the quiet certainty in her gaze, as if she wasn't traveling with me but leading me somewhere I hadn't agreed to go. The rear view called to me again, a dark mouth yawning for attention. I told myself not to look, but I did, and this time she was closer. Her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear, something inside me cracking open. My breath caught in my throat, a soundless gasp that scraped like glass against the inside of my chest. She didn't move, not in any way that physics should allow, yet the distance between us had shrunk like a collapsing lung. Her folded hands now rested on the seam of the front seat, pale fingers curved as delicately as frost. I gripped the steering wheel until my bones screamed, knuckles bleaching under the faint dashboard glow. The car became a coffin on wheels, air thinning with each inhale. I wanted to speak, to fracture the silence before it smothered me completely. But what would I say? "Who are you?" sounded too small. "What do you want?" felt even smaller. The phone buzzed again. Its vibration was frantic, like a trapped insect battering itself against glass. I snatched it up with shaking fingers. A new message slid across the screen, stark against the black. "Emily appreciates your company. Please keep driving." The words sank into me like cold water through cracked stone. My eyes darted to the app again. The timer pulsed forward. A destination had appeared now. Coordinates, not an address. Numbers stretching endlessly like a code etched for something beyond maps. I risked the mirror once more. She was still there. Same smile, but her head tilted farther like a puppet whose strings had been cut and left dangling in grotesque elegance. Her lips parted just enough to show the shadow of teeth, not white, but a dull, porous gray, as if carved from ash. A whisper seeped into the car then. Not from behind me, not from the speakers, from everywhere at once, curling like smoke through the marrow of the night. "You're almost there." I wanted to pull over, to fling open the door and run until my legs shredded against the gravel, until my lungs shredded against the cold. But another sound shackled me in place. The soft click of a seatbelt. Hers. The weight of it locking in behind me, though no motion bridged the gap. The coordinates on the screen blinked again, and beneath them, a single sentence unfolded letter. By letter, deliberate as a scalpel tracing skin, you brought her back. My vision fractured. Memories clawed up from the dark. An accident years ago. Rain slicing through headlights. The scream of tires. A flash of white skin against the road. A name I'd buried so deep it rotted into silence. Emily. My Emily. The temperature plummeted. Breath fogged thick, clinging to glass like frostbite blooming in reverse. When I dared a final glance at the mirror, her face hovered inches from mine now. Eyes hollow as winter skies. Smile stretching wider, wider, until it split the geometry of human possibility. The phone slipped from my grip, shattering the hush. With its hollow clatter, the screen blinked one last message before fading into black. Drive. And then her hand, colder than the grave, settled gently like a voice you learn to trust more than your own instincts. 2 minutes faster, it promised in its neutral, almost maternal tone. After 3 hours on the interstate, 2 minutes felt like a mercy, so I tapped accept without hesitation. That was my first mistake. The turn came suddenly, an unlit road yawning open like the throat of something patient. I slowed, tires crunching over loose gravel as asphalt gave way to something rougher, older. A sign, half swallowed by vines, leaned at an angle like it was ashamed to be seen. My headlights swept across faded letters, but the name was eroded. Beyond recognition, like bone weathered by centuries of rain, fog began to gather, not drifting like a lazy curtain but crawling, purposeful, weaving itself through the trees. They leaned in as if summoned, branches gnarled into arthritic fingers clawing at the edges of my high beams. I felt their weight pressing in, the way courtroom jurors might lean toward a man who's already guilty. The GPS chirped again. Turn left in 0.8 miles. Its voice felt wrong now, too calm, like a lullaby played at a funeral. I checked my phone out of habit, craving a second opinion, but the bars were gone. Just the map, spinning and spinning, a compass needle chasing its own tail. For the first time, I noticed the battery bleeding toward empty, red sliver against black, like an artery severed. I told myself this was still fine, still explainable. Rural networks drop, roads shift. There's logic in chaos if you're stubborn enough to find it. But the air tasted metallic, sharp against the back of my tongue, and the silence had changed. It wasn't absence anymore. It was fullness, like something vast and unseen inhaled just beyond the tree line, waiting for me to exhale so it could answer. The asphalt surrendered without warning. 1 second, smooth hum beneath the tires. The next, a grind of dirt and stones spitting up like teeth in my rearview mirror. My speedometer dipped instinctively, as if the car knew more than I did. Trees loomed closer now, their bark slick with something that gleamed like oil in my headlights. The fog thickened, swallowing whole pieces of the world until the road felt less like a path and more like an incision through flesh. I gripped the wheel tighter, every muscle tuned to the frequency of dread. My mind scrabbled for signals, landmarks, sounds, any tether back to the real. But there was nothing except the hypnotic rhythm of tires chewing gravel, and that voice, humming from the console like a secret prayer. Continue for 3 miles. The words sank under my skin, intimate and cold, like fingers tracing my spine. And then, softer. Too soft to be code, too human to be code. Another whisper bled through the speakers, curling low, deliberate, uninvited. Keep going. The whisper clung to the air like smoke that refused to clear, each syllable threading itself through the fibers of my nerves. I stared at the console, heart hammering, waiting for the robotic tone of recalculation to overwrite what I'd just heard. But the screen remained steady, calm, indifferent, its arrow fixed on a road that now looked less like a shortcut and more like a question. I thought about turning back. The idea blazed bright, a flare in the dark, until logic doused it cold. I hadn't seen a turnoff for miles. The last highway light might as well belong to another lifetime. Behind me was black, thicker now, pressing forward like water filling a trench. If I reversed, I'd be navigating blind. Forward at least offered the illusion of direction, so I drove. The fog grew heavier, clinging to the car in wet shrouds that smeared the glass with ghostly fingers. My headlights carved weak tunnels through the gray, revealing glimpses of trees that no longer looked rooted but poised, as if they'd been waiting to close ranks the moment I stopped. The smell of pine thickened until it soured, like something green left too long in the dark. My phone buzzed in the console, a tiny spasm of light in the murk. Relief surged until I saw the screen. No bars, no data, just a single notification, blinking like an eye. Continue. You're close. My breath broke into fragments. That wasn't from the GPS app. That wasn't from any app I'd installed. The words pulsed once, then vanished, leaving the screen as empty as a drained vein. That's when the sound began. Faint at first, a rhythmic thump, like a heartbeat muffled through soil. Tires? No. It came from below, deeper, resonating through the frame of the car as if the earth itself had learned to mimic life. Each beat grew louder, syncing with the pulse hammering in my ears. I leaned forward, knuckles white, scanning the road for an end, a sign, anything. But the path had changed. The dirt was gone. In its place stretched something pale, smooth, gleaming faintly as though wet. My headlights skated over it, revealing a texture that wasn't stone, wasn't wood, something fibrous, veined, almost organic. The steering wheel quivered under my grip, a tremor traveling from the tires like nerves transmitting pain. Then the trees broke. For a moment, relief cracked through the fear, until I saw what replaced them. Nothing. A hollow expanse yawning. In every direction, lit by a glow without source, like moonlight bleeding under a locked door. The road, the thing pretending to be a road, narrowed into the void like a tongue unfurling into an open throat. The console flickered. A new command etched itself across the screen, letter by deliberate letter, every pixel trembling like it. Hurt to hold the words, "Don't stop now." And from the fog ahead, something answered, soft, wet, dragging breath. Not waiting. Calling. The night had teeth. Sharp, cold ones that bit at the edges of the highway as if gnawing the world down to bone. My headlights tunneled through that darkness in pale, fragile beams, barely enough to keep me tethered to the notion of forward. I hadn't seen another soul for an hour, just blacktop unraveling under my wheels, the rhythmic hiss of tires, and the occasional glint of road signs that looked like warnings disguised as directions. Then came the lights. At first, a faint gleam in the rear view, like an ember coaxed to life in a dead hearth. Then brighter, swelling, until the mirror blazed with white fury. Headlights, enormous, bearing down on me with a hunger that felt almost sentient. I squinted against the glare, pulse hitching as instinct took over. Ease off the gas, slide to the right shoulder, let them pass. But the truck didn't pass. It clung to my bumper with surgical precision, its lights flooding my cabin in sterile brilliance, bleaching the dashboard, erasing the edges of my world. My shadow stretched grotesquely across the road ahead, a puppet pinned under interrogation lamps. The roar of its engine swelled, Not mechanical, not neutral, but guttural, like the throat of something alive and starving. I pressed the accelerator, heart thudding like a frantic signal flare. 80, 90. The truck matched me, inch for inch, the space between us razor thin. My rear view became a furnace of white heat, swallowing everything else, until the horizon ahead felt fictional. I yanked the wheel left, tires screaming against the asphalt as I veered into the opposing lane. For a heartbeat, relief flickered. Open. Air, escape. Until the truck slid with me, graceful as a predator sinking with its prey. My breath fractured into shards, lungs cutting against themselves. That's when I saw the cab. Empty. No silhouette, no hands clutching the wheel. Just a hollow cockpit framed by chrome, polished to a mirror sheen that caught the glow of my own terror and flung it back at me. My mind scrabbled for logic, for any lever to pry this back into reason. Autopilot? Remote rig? But deep down, beneath the scaffolding of excuses, something colder stirred. A certainty that this wasn't technology. This was ritual. The road unspooled like a black ribbon drenched in moonlight, endless and merciless. The truck's horn bellowed suddenly, a sound so massive it shook marrow, vibrating through the steering column into my bones. It wasn't a warning. It was a laugh, a jagged peal of sound stretched into metal thunder. Ahead, the fog began to gather, swirling like smoke around a pyre. The truck's lights fractured through it, twin suns tearing holes in the night as the roar climbed, higher, hungrier. My grip on the wheel calcified, sweat slicking the leather like melted glass. And then, without signal, without logic, the truck surged forward, blinding light detonating across my vision as it barreled into the curve of dark ahead. Except there was no curve, just void. One moment the truck was a juggernaut of light and metal tearing the world apart. The next, nothing. Silence came down like a guillotine, slicing through the roar, leaving only the thin hiss of my own tires clinging to asphalt. My lungs forgot their function. The steering wheel trembled in my grip as if the pulse of that machine still echoed through the frame of my car. I slowed, inch by inch, my mind clawing for reason like a drowning man groping for a branch. Trucks don't just vanish. There had to be a turnoff, a service road, something hidden by fog. But as the haze thinned in my high beams, the truth sprawled bare. The highway stretched straight as a drawn blade. No exit. No shoulder wide enough to swallow a rig that size. Just blacktop bleeding into infinity. The dashboard clock blinked, a stutter, a skipped beat, then resumed, seconds ticking with surgical cruelty. My phone lay in the console, its screen pulsing awake as if summoned. A notification slid across the glass in clean white letters. Keep driving. No app header, no number, just command. My fingers hovered above the screen, trembling, before logic jerked me back. I killed the screen, shoved the phone face down, and pressed the accelerator with a kind of blind faith only terror breeds. But the world didn't move the way it should. The horizon seemed to fold, bending in increments too, smooth for nature like paper creased by invisible hands. The air thickened, pressing against the windshield until it quivered as though the night itself were trying to climb inside. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a moth fluttering in a jar, growing, layering, multiplying. It was the horn. Not one, but dozens, maybe hundreds, swelling from beyond the black curtain ahead, a metallic choir groaning through miles of hollow dark. And then I saw them. Lights, scores of them, kindling in the distance like stars dragged down to earth. Pairs of eyes, wide and ravenous, blinking into existence along the edges of the void. Trucks, convoys of them. No drivers in sight, cabs yawning empty, wheels pivoting in perfect unison as they peeled from the mist to flank the road like sentries. carved from chrome and fury. The lead truck rolled forward, its headlights detonating white fire across the glass, and for an instant I glimpsed something etched into its grille, letters jagged as wounds, no exit. The horn blast ripped through me, a tectonic roar collapsing thought into raw instinct. I slammed the accelerator, the engine shrieking, but the trucks began to close ranks, metal walls grinding inward like the jaws of a colossal trap. The void. Ahead throbbed with impossible depth, a black throat yawning wide, and as I plunged toward it, every light extinguished at once, leaving only the hum of an engine that wasn't mine, whispering low, patient, infinite. Drive. The detour sign looked harmless, just a splash of orange under a star-stained sky, but every choice after midnight feels heavier than it should. I turned anyway, tires crunching onto a narrower road that split the night like a scar. Soon, the landscape opened into a flat, endless sprawl of cornfields, stalks rising on either side like serried ranks of sentinels. Their leaves hissed against each other, a low, frictioned whisper that followed me like gossip. At first, the quiet felt almost holy, the kind of stillness that reminds you how loud the modern world really is. But quiet has layers, and this one peeled itself open slow, until I heard something else breathing beneath it. Then came the lights. I noticed them in the corner of my eye, far beyond the corn, trembling like faint stars dragged too close to earth. Blue at first, soft as an afterthought, then pulsing in slow intervals that felt deliberate. Not the erratic shimmer of fireflies, not the lazy wink of distant farm lights. These glowed with purpose, like signals coded for eyes that weren't mine. My dashboard flickered, a sharp green tremor across the display before the clock spun backward, numbers tumbling like dice in the hands of something laughing. The temperature gauge plummeted next, the needle falling fast enough to carve a hole through reason. Within seconds, frost spidered across the edges of the windshield, fragile veins branching like white lightning etched into glass. The heater roared, useless, as if the cold wasn't in the air but in the atoms themselves, unraveling heat from the inside out. I gripped the wheel harder, knuckles calcifying into pale knots. The lights grew nearer now, hovering above the fields in a slow, predatory arc, silent, weightless, patient. I should have kept driving, punched the accelerator, and let logic stitch a path back to asphalt that made sense. But something locked me there, rooted by a gravity older than language. Curiosity, raw, animal, poisoned by awe. What law of physics could hum with such malice? What kind of orbit pulled those blue suns through air thick with whispers? A shape broke the question in half. It crossed the road ahead in a single, loping stride. Too long for any man, too graceful for anything bred in soil. Limbs that bent where joints shouldn't exist, silhouette rippling like heat haze but sharp enough to carve fear into bone. It didn't glance at me. That felt worse, as if acknowledgement belonged to a hierarchy I'd never climb. The corn hissed louder now, leaves thrashing like 1,000 throats whispering my name, syllables shredded into green static. Wind shouldn't carry language, but it coiled through the open seam of my window in murmurs that pressed against the soft meat of thought. And somewhere behind that whisper, almost tender, came a sound like a breath drawn close to my ear, followed by a second set of lights blooming in the dark, pulsing faster, closing in. The second set of lights hovered lower, swelling against the fog until the cornfields bled blue like submerged glass. They pulsed in intervals so precise they felt like mathematics, measured, coded, deliberate. My chest cinched tight, every breath dragging ice into my lungs. It wasn't just cold anymore. It was invasive, burrowing beneath skin, crawling into marrow like a frost that wanted memory itself. I reached for the ignition instinctively, but the key felt fused in place, as though the metal had grown roots in the cylinder. The dashboard flickered again, washing the interior in sickly green strobe. Words bled across the console screen, letters assembling like teeth in a grin. "Stay still." My pulse detonated in my throat. The steering wheel throbbed faintly under my grip, a low vibration that didn't belong to the engine. It belonged to the ground. A tremor, subtle but spreading, rippled through the frame of the car, syncing with the rhythm of those blue orbs outside. Like a heartbeat, but not mine, not human. Something shifted in the corn, a ripple, then a surge, as if the stalks had become liquid, and something vast swam beneath their surface. Leaves snapped in a crescendo, their whispers sharpening. Into syllables I almost understood, scraping the edge of language like a blade honed on bone. They weren't warning me. They were summoning something closer. And then it came. It stepped onto the road with a grace that mocked gravity, limbs bending in arcs too elegant, too cruel. Skin, or what passed for skin, gleamed under the pallid blue, slick and translucent, like a jellyfish hauled from trenches where sunlight dies. I counted too many joints, too many hinges, like an anatomy diagram revised by a sadist. Its head canted toward me, slow, deliberate, until the glass between us felt meaningless. No eyes. Just hollows where darkness pooled, a geometry of absence so deep it pulled at thought like a black hole tugging at starlight. My brain screamed to look away, but my gaze hung there, snagged on the impossible symmetry of something not built for sight yet watching me with the intimacy of touch. The phone lit in the console. Another message blinked into existence. Strokes, clean as incisions. Open the door. Every muscle rebelled, but my hand betrayed me, rising as if yanked by invisible threads. My fingers brushed the handle, slick with sweat that steamed against the cold, and that's when I heard it. A sound, so soft it curdled the air. A laugh, high and delicate, like glass chimes weeping in wind. Not outside, behind me. I turned, slow, brittle as thawing ice, and the back seat wasn't empty anymore. Something sat there, smaller than the thing outside, but bearing the same translucent skin, the same absence where eyes should be. It leaned forward, its mouth a widening void that exhaled frost into the mirror. Words etched themselves in vapor across the glass, trembling in perfect clarity. "You're part of the pattern now." The lights outside pulsed once, bright enough to burn. The sky and everything went sharp, clinical, slicing through the low thrum of the engine like a scalpel splitting silence. I glanced at the screen, expecting a name that fit the night. A friend, a late-hour question, something tethering me to normalcy. But the number glared up at me like an accusation. Home, my own number glowing in sterile blue. For a moment my thoughts staggered like a drunk fumbling for a key. Pocket dial, I reasoned, though my house phone never leaves its cradle. I almost let it go. Almost. I answered. The voice on the line was mine. Not similar, not close. A perfect copy. My cadence, my timbre, even the small throat catch I'd hated since adolescence. Hearing it was like watching your reflection blink before you do. "Keep driving," it said, calm as anesthesia. The sound tunneled into me, turning marrow to glass. I couldn't speak at first. My grip on the wheel calcified, knuckles ghost white. When I finally rasped a word, "Who?" it laughed. My laugh. A sound I'd never realized was hollow until I heard it emptied of me. "I'm you," it said simply, as if reciting gravity's law. Then, before thought could clot, it spoke again. "You're coming up on a turn. Don't take it." My eyes snapped to the dash. The GPS glowed steady, humming its neutral lullaby. "Turn left in 0.4 miles. The arrow blinked, an obedient heartbeat, promising efficiency, certainty, logic. The voice cut through, colder now. Left is wrong. The words didn't shout. They didn't need to. They slid beneath my ribs like a surgeon's hand, curling fingers around the soft machinery of belief. My pulse ricocheted, lungs stammering in shallow loops. This wasn't how fear should feel. Fear belonged to shadows, to things seen and misseen, not to a voice carved from your own throat. I looked at the screen again, desperate for anomaly. Some crack in the algorithm I could wedge reason into. But the map stretched immaculate, a neat green ribbon winding through nowhere, promising a route 2 minutes faster. I should have clung to that, a machine built from code immune to madness. But then I remembered something I'd never told anyone, the exact shade of paint on my bedroom walls. The voice told me that color, whispered it soft, precise, as if tasting the pigment. Then it recited my old childhood phone number, my mother's, birthday, the name of the dog buried behind a house I hadn't lived in for 20 years. Secrets coded like fossils under miles of memory, and it exhumed them without effort. The GPS chimed again. Turn left now. The road split ahead, yawning like a wound, left shoulder dissolving into a curl of fog. My doppelganger on the line inhaled, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. If you turn, it said, voice thin as wire, you won't make it home. I gripped the wheel so hard the leather creaked, eyes flicking between arrow and abyss. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, I had to choose, logic or the liar wearing my soul. The world slowed to a filament of moments, stretched, so thin I could almost hear it tear. On my screen, the arrow pulsed green like a steady heartbeat, promising safety in its digital certainty. On the line, my own voice lingered, a silk thread wound tight with menace. The left turn yawned closer, curling into a fog that shimmered like breath on glass. I chose. The wheel tilted under my hands, smooth as betrayal. Tires whispered against asphalt, veering left into the mouth of vapor. The GPS chimed approval in its patient monotone. Proceed 3.2 miles. Logic exhaled inside me like a narcotic, warm, soothing, until the phone spoke again. Oh, it said, low and lilting. You really shouldn't have done that. A sound followed, soft at first, almost tender, like nails drumming on wood. From a distant room. It grew louder, layering in rhythm until the noise stitched itself into the air around me. My skin prickled. The steering wheel vibrated faintly, a pulse that didn't belong to the car. Headlights cut through the fog in jagged slices, revealing trees now shouldering closer to the road. Trunks slick with something darker than rain. They leaned inward, like conspirators, limbs clawing low enough to rake the roof if I slowed. The smell hit next, iron and soil, sharp as old blood stirred from hibernation. Where does this road end? I croaked, but the voice didn't answer. It laughed, my laugh. Hollow, splintered, echoing like it had learned to break between notes. Then, my dashboard flickered. The speedometer spasmed, needling between 0 and redline. The GPS froze mid-frame before dissolving into static, its map curling like paper in flame. Through the blur, one phrase crawled across the screen, letter by molten letter, look behind you. Every nerve screamed not to obey. But compulsion is a predator with perfect teeth. My eyes dragged toward the rear view like iron to magnet natir. First, nothing. Just fog, pooling in the back seat like breath exhaled by something dreaming. Then the haze thinned, and I saw movement. A silhouette blooming slow from the dark, shoulders rising as if uncoiling from water. A head tilting, deliberate, until the shape settled into the outline of my own face. Me, not reflected, not reversed. perfectly upright, seated in the back like a passenger who had always belonged there. Its eyes gleamed black, twin pits swallowing light, and its mouth curled into a grin I recognized too well. The grin I wore when lying to myself. The phone pressed cold against my palm, though I didn't remember lifting it. One final whisper coiled through the speaker, curling like smoke into the hollow behind my ear. Now you understand. There was never a wrong turn. There was only the road you were made to take. And in the rear view, my double leaned forward, slow, patient, as the world outside dissolved into white noise. The fuel light blinked alive, a pulsing wound on the dashboard, and with it came a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I'd driven too far into nowhere, a stretch of highway so black it seemed to erase itself behind me. No towns, no markers, just a ribbon of asphalt unspooling into eternity. My phone lay dead in the console, a slab of glass that had given up the ghost hours ago. Then, out of the dark, I saw it. A glow, faint at first, trembling like a coal clinging to its last breath, then swelling into the outline of a building hunched low against the horizon. A gas station, improbably alive out here, its signage bleeding tired neon into the void. The letters flickered, spasming between fragments of a name long dead, buzzing like insects feeding on light. I could smell it before I reached the pump, a cocktail of gasoline, ozone, and something sweeter, like lilies rotting in a closed room. I rolled in on fumes, tires hissing over cracked concrete that looked clawed, scored with grooves deep enough to cradle rain, except no rain had touched this place in years, maybe centuries. The pumps were relics, paint scabbed, their hoses hanging like severed limbs. But the digits on the screen pulsed bright and modern, glowing green with impossible vitality. The station door yawned open at my touch, a bell tinkling overhead with a sound too pure for this ruin. Inside smelled of dust and heat and an undercurrent, of copper, faint but insistent, like blood drying behind plaster. Rows of snacks sagged in shelves furred with gray, cans swollen and straining their seams. And behind the counter stood a man, if man is the right word. He wore a smile that looked lacquered on, stretched wide enough to suggest the memory of hunger. His eyes, God, those eyes, were mirrors, polished to a depthless sheen, so clear they stole the shape of me and gave nothing back. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, but each syllable carried a gravity that bent the air around it. "Phil." "Up fast," he said. "The road ends tonight." I tried to answer, to push something through the vice of my throat, but language had gone brittle in my mouth. He turned away as if dismissal was ritual, and his reflection in the mirrored cooler door fractured for an instant, splintering into too many angles before reassembling like a puzzle that didn't quite fit. I stumbled back outside, pulse jackhammering, night pressing like a lead apron. The pump handle was warm, warmer than it should have been, and as the tank drank greedily, the car radio sputtered to life, though the key wasn't in the ignition. Voices, a chorus stitched from static and echo, murmuring numbers in a cadence that felt ancient. Coordinates spiraling in sequences that made my skin prickle as if my bones understood what my brain could not. The last voice was clear, calm, unhurried. My own voice, drive east, startling me like a gunshot in a cathedral. Full tank, though the pump screen still pulsed green, digits spiraling upward as if the car could never drink enough. I yanked the handle free and slid it back into its holster with shaking hands. The warmth clung to my palm like fever. Behind me, the station glared in its wounded neon glow. Letters spasming faster now, strobing fragments of words that never resolved into sense. I felt watched, not from inside, but from everywhere the darkness pressed. The cornfields, the cracked concrete, the sky that hung like black glass waiting to fracture. The radio hummed again, louder this time, voices braiding themselves into something almost melodic. Numbers unfurled like serpents. 42.19, 91.7. East, east. The cadence hit some primitive nerve, older than thought, vibrating inside marrow like tuning forks buried in bone. I slid into the driver's seat, fingers fumbling the ignition, but the key turned before I touched it. The engine stirred awake with a low growl, steady, patient, like an animal crouched in tall grass, waiting for its cue. My phone glared suddenly from the console, alive, though it had been dead an hour ago. Its screen bled white, then black, then settled into text that crawled letter by letter, as though carved by an invisible blade. Follow the coordinates. Then beneath it, or we bring the road to you. The air thickened. I could smell the copper note stronger now, mingling with gasoline until it coated my tongue like pennies held too long in a sweaty palm. My chest constricted as if the night itself had slipped inside and cinched its fingers around my ribs. I pulled onto the empty highway, neon shrinking behind me until it winked out like a star snuffed in deep water. The engine purred smoother than it had in years, gliding over asphalt that gleamed like polished obsidian. My headlights tunneled through the dark, revealing nothing but a straight road stitched against a horizon that refused to draw closer. The voices didn't stop. They swelled, overlapping in tongues that bent like metal under heat, then folded into English again. My name, over and over, braided with coordinates that stretched beyond the scale of any map I knew. East, always east, like an arrow tattooed under my skull. And then, the sky broke. A glow bled up from the horizon. Not dawn, not electric, but something raw and searing, like a wound opening where the world thinned to bone. Shapes quivered against it. Spires or towers or organisms too vast to obey the geometry of men. For one sick moment, I thought they were moving toward me. Then I realized the truth. The road itself was unspooling, dragging me forward like thread into a loom. My phone vibrated once more. A final line etched itself across the screen, stark and merciless. Your fuel. And in the rear view, the station still burned, though I had driven 50 miles past where it should exist. It began as absence disguised as coincidence. One star blinking out in the rear view, a faint loss barely grazing the edge of thought. Then, another and another until the sky above me looked like a book missing its vowels. Language gutted, meaning hollowed. At first I blamed my eyes, strained and gritty from hours of night driving. But clarity came like a blade. There were no clouds, no fog, no halo of light pollution. Just darkness eating light with surgical precision, unthreading constellations, one by one. I killed the radio, silenced the car's mechanical hum, and rolled the window down to let the cold speak its verdict. The air carried nothing, no scent of soil, no hiss of wind, just a stillness so complete it pressed against my skull. I tilted my head back, scanning for the old anchors, Orion, Cassiopeia, that indifferent sprawl of stars we once believed eternal. Gone. Only a handful lingered, burning weaker, like dying lanterns guttering against an infinite tide. The road narrowed ahead, its asphalt slick with a strange sheen, as if lacquered by something older than rain. My headlights carved, twin wounds into the black, but even they seemed thinner now, paling like a fevered sun. Shadows didn't scatter anymore. They lingered, bold and arrogant, soaking up light as though they'd learned the trick of hunger. At 60 miles per hour, I felt the mathematics of the universe collapsing in the spaces I couldn't see. Light doesn't vanish. It travels until something takes it. And something was taking it. That truth throbbed behind my ribs, a slow drumbeat of awe curdled by terror. What force edits the cosmos in real time? What appetite gnaws at infinity and calls it routine? My hands clung to the wheel, bones aching like they'd learned to fear the concept of empty. Then the dashboard dimmed, not flickering, not failing, just conceding, as if light itself had grown tired. The speedometer dipped into murk, the green glow fading to bruise-colored whispers. My phone on the console lit once, weak as a dying coal, before winking into nothing. I leaned forward, searching the horizon for a tether, a sign, a house, a sliver of neon, but the road stretched unbroken, a black tendon pulled taut between two voids. And then, impossibly, movement. A figure etched against the erasure of night. It glowed faintly, a fevered ember trembling at the edges of human shape. Not white, not gold, but something raw, a hue you feel in bone rather than name. Its arm lifted, slow, deliberate, in the ancient language of need, a wave summoning me closer. Instinct snapped every muscle into protest, but gravity works in more ways than one. My foot eased off the gas as if coerced, and the car bled speed, rolling toward that fragile beacon in the dark. When I stopped, silence deepened. The figure leaned down to the glass, its face a blur of heat shimmer, and spoke in a voice that felt older than lungs. "You're late." The words dripped into the car like molten metal, heavy enough to warp thought. "You're late." Not a question, not surprise. A verdict delivered by something that understood time in units my species had never named. My pulse stammered against my ribs, a metronome gone feral, as the figure's glow pulsed once, twice, each surge stealing more color from the world until the night outside congealed into absolute black. I cracked the window because terror makes fools of us, and the air that slid in was wrong, thin and brittle, like the ghost of air, stripped of oxygen's mercy. It scraped down my throat and set roots in my lungs. "Who are you?" My voice fractured in my own ears, brittle as thawing ice. The figure tilted its head, a gesture that felt almost tender until its edges shivered, unraveling into strands of light that snapped back into place like elastic stretched too far. Its glow dimmed for a breath, then flared, and for the blink of an instant, I saw what wore that shape. A lattice of filaments coiled like veins of fire, looping into patterns that mocked anatomy. No flesh, no bone, just architecture coded in radiance. "You call it distance," it murmured, words rippling through the glass as if sound had abandoned air. "But what you fear isn't miles, it's absence. Absence of warmth, absence of witness, absence of light." Behind it, the last of the stars winked out. The sky collapsed into a seamless sheet of dark, depthless as an ocean with its floor torn away. My headlights faltered next, beams thinning to spindles before surrendering completely. The world outside my windshield became an ink blot swallowing itself. The figure moved closer, glow blooming until it filled the cabin like a phantom sun. Heat licked my skin, but not the heat of fire. This was clinical, precise, like a sterilization before incision. "You mistake the sky for a ceiling," it said, its voice now inside me, coiling between neurons like smoke. But it was always a membrane. Tonight it tears. The dashboard flared suddenly, vomiting symbols I'd never seen, loops intersecting in fractal spirals, numbers that bent logic until it screamed. My radio spat static, then fused into a chorus of voices, all mine, each one reciting the same phrase with clockwork certainty. "Light isn't gone, it's being gathered." My hands welded to the wheel, bones vibrating like tuning forks as the car began to move. Slow first, then surging forward, though my feet touched nothing. The figure didn't climb inside. It dissolved, threading itself into the glow flooding. the glass until my reflection warped into something luminous and unfamiliar. Ahead, the horizon cracked open, not with dawn, but with a brilliance so violent it shredded shadow into ribbons and peeled the dark like old paint. Within that rupture pulsed structures, vast, searing, alive, looming like cathedrals designed by extinction itself. And as the car hurtled toward them, the last sound I heard wasn't my scream. It was my own voice whispering inside my skull, calm, assured, infinite. Welcome back to the source. Tore through the dark like a promise, glowing soft as salvation against the endless black. Exit 49, it read, letters backlit in sterile light, humming faintly like a throat clearing in the distance. My pulse unclenched for the first time in hours. Home was close. I could almost taste the ghost of warmth, the gravity of familiar walls, the hush of a bed that had forgotten my shape. I flicked on my blinker, an absurd gesture out here where no eyes existed but mine, and veered toward the ramp yawning open like a mouth. The asphalt curved gentle at first, an obedient sweep of black ribbon spinning me away from the desolation of the interstate. My headlights washed over concrete barriers damp with dew, their shadows crawling long and skeletal along the guardrails. But the ramp didn't end. One loop became two, then three, coiling tighter, a serpent gnawing its tail. My knuckles calcified against the wheel, the leather slick beneath my palms. I eased off the accelerator, waiting for the curve to flatten into the straight line of reason. It didn't. The circle held, infinite and smug, a geometry built by something that hated corners. I laughed then. Dry, brittle, a sound shaped more by panic than humor. Maybe I'd missed the merge, spun into a cloverleaf maze with exits hidden, like riddles. But the speedometer told another truth. I hadn't slowed. If anything, the car drifted faster, tires whispering over pavement that gleamed too smooth, like bone polished by centuries of touch. The sign appeared again. Green. Patient. Hovering like a sentinel above the curve ahead. Relief surged, until I read it. No way back. The words throbbed in reflective white, letters too crisp, too clean for a highway sign. My breath stuttered, a jagged loop mirroring the road. The engine's hum deepened, dropping into a register that vibrated through my spine like a tuning fork struck against bone. I checked the fuel gauge, desperate for an anchor of normal. The needle had nosedived, red slashing across the dial like a warning scrawled in blood. Impossible. I'd filled the tank less than an hour ago, yet the gauge shivered on empty, quivering as if something inside the car drank deeper than gasoline. Sweat braided my temples, cool threads trickling into the hollow above my jaw. The ramp kept curling, devouring perspective, and for one lunatic instant I imagined the earth beneath me peeling like an orange, spiraling until only this road remained, a single black tendril writhing through void. The sign pulsed again as I rounded the loop. Same green glow, same sterile hum. But the message had changed. Welcome home. The letters gleamed like teeth in the dark, and for the first time I noticed their shape wasn't paint. It was light seared into metal, as if the words themselves were alive. Behind me, the ramp sealed into nothing. Ahead, the circle tightened, and in the hush that followed, I thought I heard breathing. Not mine. The breathing came in waves, slow, tidal, drawn through something vast and patient. Each inhale pressed against the glass, a phantom palm flattening across the windshield before vanishing into condensation that curled like veins. My fingers strangled the wheel, every tendon rigid, as if white-knuckled devotion could rewrite. Geometry. I forced my eyes forward, hunting for escape, for fracture, for the mercy of a straight line. But the ramp kept looping, hungry and eternal, its black arc gleaming like the spine of something alive. My headlights swung wide, sweeping over guardrails that weren't guardrails anymore. They writhed in subtle convulsions, twisting like muscle under translucent skin. The fuel light flared red, bright enough to brand my vision. The gauge trembled on 0, yet the car surged effortlessly, engine humming with an unnatural calm. Heat crawled up through the floorboard, coiling around my calves in ribbons of breath. That was when I realized the engine wasn't burning fuel anymore. It was burning me, drawing heat from marrow, pulling voltage from the soft circuits of thought. The sign appeared again, tilting over the curve like a sermon. "Welcome home," it sang in white fire, letters stretching taller than before, their edges bleeding light that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. The air thickened with the stench of ozone and something sweeter, like paper ash laced with honey, a scent that didn't belong to roads or rain, but to rituals older than asphalt. I tried the brakes. The pedals sank soft, boneless, and stayed there, pliant as wet clay. My pulse jackhammered, skull ringing like a church bell struck inside bone. The dashboard flickered, screens spasming into static before resolving into a single phrase, scrawled in pixels sharp as needles. "Stop struggling." The voice followed, coiling through the speakers in my own timbre, smooth and patient as oil. This was never about distance. You were always circling back. Something shifted in the rear view. My reflection leaned forward, not in sync, not bound. To my bones. Its smile curled slow, serpentine, until the corners cracked wider than flesh should allow. Teeth, too many, too white, blossomed in the dark behind my eyes. The ramp tightened, coiling into a spiral so dense the horizon collapsed. The guardrails fused overhead, birthing a tunnel ribbed like the inside of some colossal throat. My headlights fractured, light splintering into prisms before dimming into an amber glow that kissed surfaces slick as tendon. The car slowed without will, cradled in momentum that wasn't mine, and when it stopped, the silence was surgical. Ahead yawned a chamber vast and lightless, except for the sign, impossible now in size, filling the void like a verdict. "Welcome home." The engine sighed, a final exhale that sounded almost tender, and darkness poured in, folding like velvet over glass, over lungs, over thought. The last thing I heard before everything died wasn't the hum of tires or the hiss of breath. It was my own voice, closer than bone, softer than sin, whispering, "You never left. Subscribe, if you can."